first, let's take a step back and walk me through why these companies have a monopoly and make your case for why they should be broken up.
Yeah, of course. So I think the market share numbers are really interesting. Within the enterprise mobile market, which where a lot of this value is, the Apple market share, if you sort of Google it, it's quite a bit higher than 30%. When I did my research, it was 85, 90%. I'm not a statistician, but these are big numbers. And I think also we have to look at that 30%. There's no cost basis to the 30%. And you have to ask yourself why Google and Apple both have the same rates. And are they really competing, or is it sort of an agreement that we're just going to charge 30%, everything's going to be good? As you know, they're making big money out of this, and until this moment, nobody's really pressed very hard.
And John,
go ahead.
Talk me through what is the standard, if you will. I mean, even on the government's website, they say being a monopoly is not illegal. And these companies have every right to pursue aggressive pricing in order to maintain a monopoly. And really only until consumers get hurt is this a problem. Are consumers hurt? These prices are free. Amazon arguably has been lowering prices for consumers. What is that like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, to your point, Amazon is another thing. I think Google and Facebook and those kind of companies are a little different too. Those are more like advertising companies. But I think, talking about Apple, I think the thing is that they didn't, they've done really well. Back in the old days when I was there the first time, we were almost dead. It was the mid-90s, and Steve had just come back, and a lot of the guys are still there from those moments, and they've done really, really well. And I think a lot of the reason why this is complicated for them emotionally is they're not used to being in this dominant position. But the question is for a company like Spotify, should they be paying Apple probably more than they pay the U.S. government, right? Because Apple gets 30% of revenue, not 30% of profit. There's no deductions, right? It seems, if you're Spotify, it seems rough to compete with your competitor and hand them 30% of your cash. So I think that's sort of to put a fine point on it. I think there's some cases like that. I think in terms of customers being harmed, without putting too fine a point in this, you'll see a lot of companies like Netflix rearrange their whole way to charge customers just to get around the Apple tax, and that's kind of strange, right? I think we all want to concentrate on making great products for the customer, and if Apple didn't have that big tax, Netflix and the other companies would make it much easier to purchase their products.
Well, given your history and experience with Apple, I have to ask, what does sort of an Apple breakup look like to you? Is it separating a hardware and software? How does the App Store come into play? What are the concerns of how Apple could be split up, if at all?
Yeah, you're going to make me really popular with my friends at Apple.
That's our job here.
Yeah, right. Of course. So I think, as you know, in these kind of cases, I think there's a lot of remedies. You can imagine, for example, after some discussion, these companies just agreeing to lower their prices, lower their percentages. Or you could say, does Apple really need to have the App Store, right? Apple could be asked to let go of the App Store and be the platform company, just not do the store, right? And not charge that percentage. And then they could have some other model, right? You can see that could happen. I don't think that would be particularly damaging to Apple. And in fact, if there's a market for app stores, that'd be super interesting. I think one of the things that we notice when we use the App Store is it's not particularly good at what it does. It's hard to find products if you don't know what you're looking for. And you can imagine if there were more specialized app stores, it actually might be a better place.
John, generally speaking, what does this mean for the future of innovation? I'm thinking of a small company who expects that in a few years they could be looked at being bought out by a big company like an Apple or an Amazon. Does this make them a little bit more nervous about developing that big innovation if there isn't a good exit path for them?
Yeah, good question. Honestly, I think both the companies that you are talking about will never, not in the foreseeable future, have an issue with cash. You may remember there were a few years ago during one of America's financial crises, Apple had more money in the bank than the United States of America. So I think that it will still be true that there'll be plenty of money to purchase startups. I think on the other side, with a couple of changes, maybe there'll be more open markets for smaller companies. Some of the things that Apple does as part of its muscle memory to protect, which is a really good muscle memory. I think one of the things I want to say about this week is Apple came out really strong about privacy, and I'm personally really proud that they did that. Because as you know, not everybody does that, and this is really clearly in Tim's DNA. So I think that's really good. So I think some of that muscle memory, though, is a bit overprotective. We all do that with our children and other things, right? So Apple could open and make it a little easier to do some of these things. There's a bunch of cases that are, some of them are kind of technical around services and apps and things, but you could actually have a more innovative place.
John, I spoke with Scott Galloway. He's a professor over at NYU and has studied a lot of these big tech companies. He made sort of a bold prediction that within the next 5 to 10 years, instead of these big four, we really could see smaller 6 to 10 companies. Through your research and analysis, do you have any idea of how many companies this could be? Are we looking at what could be potentially up to 10 different companies?
I think it's a good question. I think when you look at the remedies for a company like Google or Facebook, you could easily see those being split up into several companies, along with some remedies around, I think in Facebook, you could see digital accounting stepping in, a company like PwC or some other company stepping in and providing audits so that the user data is handled better. And then you could see that maybe that would be split. I think, you have to begin with the end in mind. What do we want? I think we want, we're proud of these amazing companies. They're a big part of why America is so strong today. We don't want to wreck that, right? But we also want to continue to have innovation, right? And I think also we're all struggling in America with the digital divide, not just inner cities and others, but also Main Street America that's out in the middle of Iowa somewhere. So part of the stuff we're talking about here is how to make that continue to be better, right? Because we know that one of the things we're worried about with a company like Amazon is that old thing we used to call the Walmart effect, right? Which is these big companies can accidentally make small main streets worse, right? They can accidentally shut down some stores. They don't mean to do these things, So part of the remedies that we've seen in the past as well are things like, the cable companies or the phone companies are forced to run lines out to the country, right? So every American gets a chance, right? So you can see that happening with some of these things too. So you could see splitting off from the big four, big five. You could see, yeah, sure, you could see 8, 10. And then you could see, though, at second level, maybe you have 4 or 5 app store companies. Maybe you have, maybe AWS is no longer part of Amazon, right? Who knows, But I think all of us Americans, we do like capitalism, right? I mean, not all of us, but, capitalism's a good thing generally. And so what we want it to work, right? We know that we have stories from our history books where, a big company got too powerful.
Right.
And as I said, Apple is, I think, one of those cases where they've done really well. We should let them have a victory lap, and then we should find a way. It's like playing checkers with your kid, and you're doing too well, so you sort of back off. So some of those cases are, for Apple, they can just change the field a little bit, right? Make it a little more open.